So I'll comment on the video, The Great Money Trick, and as some of you will notice, it's from 2009, and the reason I'm commenting on it so late is because according to a deal I have with my Patreons, if they pay me $50 or more, I will consider talking about the video or an article of their choosing. However, I do think that this is an amazing choice since 2009, more YouTube channels have constantly posted about the great money trick over and over. And even though it doesn't get a lot of views, it does get comments like Gabriel G, who says if only more people would watch this video and understand what it has and has happened for years. Capitalists are rich because they steal. Stealing from the fruits of the workers' labor. Capitalism must end. Now, people like Gabriel G, you need to understand they're either socialists or communists. And it's important to understand this because they operate on different principles and values than you do. And if you watch my previous video on the conquest of bread, where a socialist ideologue is talking about these issues, you will understand the different fundamentals that they view life from. So, for instance, when they say that capitalists are stealing, the reason they're saying this is because, let's take a random object, let's take a pencil. They don't view you as owning that pencil. They view that you have stolen the pencil. The reason they do this is because acquisition for them is not a legitimate way of ownership. Reason is that even if you went to the store and purchased the pencil, then you are not technically the owner because the store wasn't the owner. Store wasn't the owner is because they didn't make the pencil. The factory workers made the pencil, right? So the factory workers are also not the owner because the trees were delivered to the factories by the woodcutters, and the woodcutters are the owners because someone planted the trees before them. And because we can't actually say who is the owner, we can't really find out who are all the people who contributed in making the pencil and delivering it to the store where you bought it from, then the pencil should belong to everyone, right? Everybody should have access to the pencil. And this is an unjust system because technically we could figure out who created the pencil, right? All the people involved. And a just system, by this logic, should belong to the people that actually worked in order to create the pencil. However, most of the socialists, the ideologues at least, you'll notice that they're middle class, bourgeoisie people who don't lift a finger. Instead, they're philosophers and ideologues and journalists and professors who sit behind the keyboard and talk about socialist ideology, but they don't really go and work and create pencils, do they? However, they want ownership of that pencil. Now, I know it's ridiculous because I chose the example as a pencil, but think about it this way. Any object has the same principles applied. Your house should belong to everyone. Your computer should belong to everyone. Your car should belong to everyone. You should have no private property because owning private property means you're stealing. It means you're theft because the socialist journalist doesn't have access to it, so he's going to call you now a thief. So you either have to give it up so that if he doesn't have it, then he's going to kill you for it. This is what happened in Soviet Russia. People who didn't want to give up their property, didn't want to give up their land to Lenin's goons, were summarily shot and executed. So this is why socialism is a very dangerous and very horrible ideology to have. It sounds good in principle, but when you think about it and you apply logic to it, it's actually a very detrimental ideology, one that does not value human life whatsoever.
Money is the real cause of poverty.
Right, so let's talk about money for a bit, because this is one of the things that socialists want to eliminate. I already spoke about money in a previous video, but I'll recap it really shortly for people who didn't hear that video to understand. What is money, right? So if you want to go and mow your neighbor's lawn, the neighbor is going to reward you with, let's say, $10. When you go to the store to buy candy, the store owner is going to ask you, what have you done for your fellow men? And you say, well, I have mowed my neighbor's lawn. And the store owner is going to say, can you prove that? So you pull out the $10 bill, which is proof that you have contributed to society in some way, shape, or form. Now, this is the general rule, right? There's obviously exceptions, and it's why us as a society really view the people who are benefiting from the exceptions in a negative light. This is why, for instance, someone who wins the lottery is going to have their names censored so that people don't know they won a significant amount at the lottery, because people are very jealous of others who earn money without contributing to society in a meaningful way. It can even go to the point where it becomes a crime. Like if you find a wallet filled with money on the ground, if you don't return it to the police and instead decide to keep it, you might face criminal prosecution, because that money doesn't belong to you. You haven't done anything to society to deserve the money. Other examples might be that someone places a lot of money in the bank and then gets interest. The socialists usually do give this as an example, as a person who's earning money without doing anything, but they don't think that by doing this, by placing money in the bank, you're actually helping the economy, because other upstarting businesses might loan money from the bank. You might take some of that money that you placed in the bank in order for them to start a business. So you're basically contributing in helping others do other things for society. Another one is the idea of someone inheriting money, right? So you have a rich uncle and you're poor, and all of a sudden the uncle leaves you his mansion and whatnot. These are extremely rare cases, and they shouldn't be considered as the general rule. However, it does show that 70% of people who do earn massive inheritance end up losing them anyway. So the system is perfect, right? Now, why is it money important? Well, without money, I do think that society would stagnate. There would be no reason to innovate. There would be no reason for anyone to work harder than other people. What I mean by this is, if you have a job where everyone has to work 8 hours, there would be no reason for someone to work 10 or 12 hours. There would also be no reason for someone to work harder than everyone else. Sure, there might be some people who will do this, but generally speaking, this is not going to be the case. Now, with money involved, let's say the owner of the business comes to you and says, look, if you want to work extra hours, if you want to come Saturday and Sunday at work, if you want to put 2 extra hours in, I'm going to pay you more. It's up to you if you want to take this or not. Then obviously some people will want to do it, and these people are going to be rewarded. These people are going to get more money. That doesn't mean that the people who don't want to do it are going to be shamed or anything. No, it's just that the value that you contribute to society is going to be reflected with the amount of cash that you're making. And this will encourage people to try to contribute more to society. It's something that didn't really happen under the Iron Curtain in USSR, where there was no incentive, and this is why at a lot of factories and a lot of places where people worked, they really didn't have the incentive, and people actually grew quote-unquote lazy. It's not that they were lazy, that they weren't working, but they weren't doing anything more than the bare minimum required. Like, they would keep the factory operational, but the factory would never excel. The factory would never do better, because there was no incentive of making the factory better. In fact, the mentality also changed. Like, people who were struggling hard and would become quote-unquote worker of the month, they were shamed. It's like, what the fuck are you trying to prove? This isn't your dad's factory. Do you think you're better than us? Do you think you're more intelligent than us? This is how people back then were treated if they were standing out in a positive way, because everyone had to be equal. And while it's hard to get someone that's below the ladder to get him to climb up, it's a lot easier to get the people who have climbed up to go back down.
Said Owen.
Prove it.
Said Crass.
Money is the cause of poverty because it is the device by which those who are too lazy to work are enabled to rob the workers of the fruits of their labour.
So the argument is that the factory owners, I guess, they're lazy to work, and they're not doing anything.
Prove it.
Repeated Crass. Owen slowly folded up the piece of newspaper he had been reading and put it in his pocket.
All right,
He replied.
I'll show you how the great money trick has worked.
Owen opened his dinner basket and took from it 2 slices of bread, but as these were not sufficient, he requested that anyone who had some bread left should give it to him. They gave him several pieces, which he placed in a heap on a clean piece of paper, and having borrowed the pocket knives of Easton, Harlow and Philpott, he addressed them as follows.
These pieces of bread represent the raw materials which exist naturally in and on the earth for the use of mankind. They were not made by any human being, but were created for the benefit and sustenance of all, the same as were the air and the light of the sun. Now,
Continued Owen.
I am a capitalist, or rather I represent the landlord and capitalist class. That is to say, all these raw materials belong to me. It does not matter for our present argument how I obtain possession of them. The only thing that matters now is the admitted fact that all the raw materials which are necessary for the production of the necessities of life are now the property of the landlord and capitalist class.
So what really pisses me off about this argument is that this is a very antiquated criticism towards capitalists. This argument would have worked 100 years ago against the capitalist society in Russia. However, capitalism has since evolved, and many of these criticisms have been fixed. But first of all, let's talk about what the criticism is, right? So he talks about resources that simply exist, no one worked for them. So let's take one of them, let's say oil. Now, in America, of course, there are companies who are going to have license to extract oil. Now, according to this argument, these companies are lazy and they don't want to work, but this is far from the truth. These companies not only do need to extract the oil without damaging the goods, so they need to have the know-how of how to extract it properly, they also need to make sure they don't damage the environment while doing so, and there are legal consequences if one company starts damaging the environment. Let's say there's an oil spill and it floods the oceans or whatnot. Now, of course, someone will say, well, still, why does a company have the right to extract the oil? They didn't really create the oil. Why can't anyone extract it? And this argument is something that countries in Europe have also tackled. And for instance, in Norway, if you find oil in your backyard, it doesn't belong to you, it belongs to the state. So it has been nationalized, right? This is exactly what the communist wants. It's like, okay, since these resources exist on Earth, then it wouldn't be fair for anyone to lay claim on it, and it should belong to everyone. This is why the Norway government, by selling the oil, they do have certain social programs that benefit everyone that's a citizen of Norway. However, the socialists will complain about this with something that makes me laugh, is that they will say these quote-unquote small fixes towards capitalism is taking away the revolutionary spirit away from the worker. So in other words, the rich bourgeoisie journalists, university professors, and philosophers, they're really bitching that the revolution that will put them in charge isn't happening, because the capitalists are actually fixing the criticisms that they have found without actually going full socialist, without nationalizing every private property. And this infuriates them to no regard.
I am that class. All these materials belong to me. Now you three represent the working class. You have nothing. And for my part, although I have all these raw materials, they're of no use to me. What I need is the things that can be made out of these raw materials by work. But I'm too lazy to work for myself.
Again, this is completely false. So first of all, the criticism is antiquated, right? Most of the jobs today in capitalist countries are office jobs. So we should talk about Facebook, Google, YouTube, right? Why exactly is Mark Zuckerberg in charge of Facebook? He is in charge of Facebook because he's the man who came up with the idea. He came up with the idea, he invested a lot of money in it, and at one point his idea could have failed. All the money that he invested could have been lost. So he actually took a risk. Another example would be with my YouTube channel, right? I'm still deciding if I should continue my medical career or get full-time YouTuber. Now, technically, if I go full-time YouTuber, and let's say I reach 1 million subscribers or something, then I will need to hire a staff. I will need to hire a better accountant to do my accounting, probably need to hire a guy to do the lighting. I would probably have to hire someone that will do video editing or whatnot, right? But according to socialism, these people would be oppressed by me, because even though I'm paying them wages, these people are now being oppressed, since they should have full ownership of my channel, and I should, share all of my revenue with them. However, I would be taking a massive risk, because at any point my YouTube channel could fail, I could not reach 1 million points, and then I would be out of a job and, probably in quite a financial distress. So the socialists never take into account the capitalist risks that they are taking, and they're also considering that the capitalists are lazy, when in fact they're some of the most courageous people in the population. Starting a business takes a lot of guts. Starting a business takes a lot of risks. Not everyone can do it, and a lot of people fail. So the ones that do succeed, they do need the praise because, well, they have succeeded. And succeeding in starting a business is just a small step. You have to maintain the business. You have to stand up against the competition. All of these things are never mentioned by the socialist ideologues.
But first I must explain that I possess something else beside the raw materials. These 3 knives represent all the machinery of production, the factories, tools, railways, and so forth, without which the necessities of life cannot be produced in abundance. And these 3 coins,
Taking 3 halfpennies from his pocket,
which represent my money, my capital. But before we go any further,
said Owen, interrupting himself,
it is important to remember that I am not supposed to be merely a capitalist. I represent the whole capitalist class, and you are not supposed to be just 3 workers. You represent the whole working class.
And here is another problem that I find with this. They talk about capitalists as they all have the same mutual interest, as if they all work together, while the working class also has the same mutual interest. Like, for instance, a dock worker and, let's say, a hospital nurse have everything in common, and they're all being exploited, and there's really no choice. It's almost like slavery, right? And the funny thing is that in the actual socialist utopia, you do have slavery. Like, I remember when the Iron Curtain was above Romania, people who wouldn't have a job, they would be called social parasites. So they were taken by the police, beaten, and then forced to go in a factory and work. Like, you didn't have the option of not working. You had to find a job. Even if, let's say, your family was earning a lot and they could basically decide that the wife can stay home and take care of the kids. No, the wife had to work. She was forced to find a job and work. And there was this guy that I knew, a gypsy, who was singing at weddings, and he was making a lot of money by doing so. The police caught him during working hours on the street, arrested him, beat him, and said, okay, so you make this much money by singing at a few weddings, and this money is the equivalent of what a worker makes with his sweat in a factory in an entire month. Do you think that's a good example to give? So they broke his violin in front of him and then forced him into a factory where he didn't have any skill, didn't have any knowledge of how to do. And that is the socialist utopia, you know. So which one is slavery more? A society where everyone is forced to work, or a society where people can just choose their jobs, they can choose the careers they want, they can negotiate the salary with their boss, they have a right to get a promotion, so on and so forth.
Owen proceeded to cut up one of the slices of bread into a number of little square blocks.
These represent the things which are produced by labour, aided by machinery, from the raw materials. We will suppose that 3 of these blocks represent a week's work, and we will suppose that a week's work is worth £1.
Owen now addressed himself to the working class as represented by Philpott, Harlow and Easton.
You say that you are all in need of employment, and as I am the kind-hearted capitalist class, I'm going to invest all my money in various industries, so as to give you plenty of work. I shall pay each of you £1 per week, and a week's work is that you must each produce 3 of these square blocks. For doing this work you will each receive your wages. The money will be your own, to do with as you wish, and the things you produce will of course be mine, to do with as I wish. You will each take one of these machines, and as soon as you have done a week's work, you shall have your money.
The working classes accordingly set to work, and the capitalist class sat down and watched them. As soon as they had finished, they passed the 9 little blocks to Owen, who placed them on a piece of paper by his side and paid the workers their wages.
These blocks represent the necessities of life. You can't live without some of these things. But as they belong to me, you will have to buy them from me.
Again, this is a very antiquated criticism to capitalism. Most European nations do not allow people to starve. We do have social programs and social security safety nets that if someone is starving, he can go to a homeless shelter, or he can appeal to certain social programs and he will be fed. This is just absolutely ridiculous that it's talked about in 2017. And even then, there are charities as well. Like, for instance, in France, there's this new law that forbids supermarkets from throwing away excess food. Like all the excess food is being collected and then it's being taken to poor shelters, homeless shelters, so on and so forth. Again, it's like either you work or you starve to death. Might have been true 100 years from now, but in today's society, in capitalist societies, especially in Europe or in America, people don't really starve. Like, this is a really weird way of dying. You know, finding someone with starvation would be a shock to doctors. But in socialist countries or countries that attempted to become socialist, in Africa and Venezuela, so on and so forth, a lot of people starve to death. Holy shit, Soviet Russia. Right? People in capitalist countries don't starve to death. They die because they're fat.
And my price for these blocks is £1 each.
As the working classes were in need of the necessaries of life, and as they could not eat, drink, or wear the useless money, they were compelled to agree to the capitalists' terms. They each bought back, and at once consumed, 1/3 of the produce of their labour. The capitalist class also devoured 2 of the square blocks, and so the net result of the week's work was that the kind capitalist had consumed £2 worth of things produced by the labour of others, and reckoning the squares at their market value of £1 each, he had more than doubled his capital, for he still possessed the £3 in money, and in addition £4 worth of goods. As for the working class...
It's funny because this slavery system actually exists in Qatar, where they take away your passport. And the reason I say it's funny is because Qatar is actually sponsoring a lot of Western media like Al Jazeera and other AJ+, Newsweek, I think even the Young Turks. And these are a lot of, how should I say, outlets that criticize capitalism constantly, right? So they're criticizing capitalism for a version of capitalism that doesn't exist, but it exists in Qatar, the nation that founds these journalistic outlets.
Philpott, Harlow and Easton, having each consumed the pound's worth of necessaries they had bought with their wages, they were again in precisely the same condition as when they had started work. They had nothing.
Okay, so this is why I call it bullshit. And the reason I call it bullshit is because in today's capitalist society, yeah, you start working for £1, right? And if you don't like it, you can go to a competitor that pays you more. And as you're working, let's say you become really good at your job, now you have a choice. You can go to your employer and demand a raise, or you can quit and start your own job. And you'll say, well, how can you start your job if you don't have any money? If you have a really good idea for a job, you can loan money from the bank. You can start a crowdfunding. Literally, you can use Kickstarter in order to start off a project. You can even get a job that's just newly on the market, something that didn't exist before, like my YouTube career. I'm doing a job that didn't exist 10 years ago. You know, all of these things aren't mentioned in the socialist criticism of capitalism.
This process was repeated several times. For each week's work, the producers were paid their wages.
I mean, I remember when I was working at KFC, right? Now, I gave up working at KFC because I started my law school and my grades were suffering because of it. But basically, if I would have worked there for like 3 years and I would have been really good at my job, eventually I would have been promoted to junior manager. And after working as junior manager for a while, I could be promoted to manager. And then you can get even further up the ranks. Because these companies, these corporations, prefer hiring people from inside rather than from outside. And you can even end up being like a regional manager or something, right? You'll never be able to become like the top. However, as a regional manager, you will have access to luxury and to money that you've never had before. And let's say that you get really bored of your job, you can actually quit. And with the money you've obtained, you can start your own let's say fast food joint, and you can use the knowledge you have learned at KFC. You can maybe you will not know the recipe and whatnot, but you will understand at least how to operate and how to manage a fast food joint to the point where you can start your own business. I will probably upload a video explaining to people how capitalism works, but probably I'm going to do it tomorrow. Because I'm really pissed off about these criticisms. They have nothing to do with the version of reality of which we run our countries in 2017.
They kept on working and spending all their earnings. The kind-hearted capitalist consumed twice as much as any one of them, and his pool of wealth continually increased. In a little while, reckoning the little squares at their market value of £1 each,
What I like is that the capitalist doesn't have any creditors. Like, he doesn't have to pay up to the people that he loaned money from. He doesn't have to pay up to the workers, which are demanding more and more money as the company becomes bigger and bigger. This is not the version of reality. This is just pure fiction. Maybe it was a version of reality 100 years ago. I'm sorry for repeating myself over and over, but this is what I want people to take from this video the most. All criticisms to capitalism are being done from philosophers and ideologues that lived before us, and they no longer apply today.
he was worth about £100, and the working classes were still in the same condition as when they began, and were still tearing into their work as if their lives depended on it. After a while, the rest of the crowd began to laugh, and their merriment increased when the kind-hearted capitalist, just after having sold a pound's worth of necessaries to each of his workers, suddenly took their tools, the machinery of production, the knives, away from them.
But it's not them. It's not their tools. It is the capitalist tools. And do you know why it's the capitalist tools? I'll tell you why. If one of them breaks, it's up to the capitalist to replace it. It wouldn't be just and it wouldn't be fair if I, at my hospital, let's say the computer tomograph breaks, and that's a really expensive piece of medical equipment. Wouldn't be fair if I would have to pay for it and fix it? You know, unless I personally damaged it, then yeah. But let's say it breaks because, you know, it's an old machine, and after so much time and so many uses, it just broke, right? It's the hospital's manager's job to buy a replacement. It's not my job to pay for it because it's not mine.
And informed them that as owing to overproduction, all his storehouses were glutted with the necessaries of life, he had decided to close down the works.
Well, and what the bloody hell are we to do now?
Demanded Philpott.
Okay, well, in a capitalist society in Europe, if that happens, you would get unemployment money from the state until you find a new job. Like, the state will not let you starve, okay? They will pay you money, a small amount, by the way, not enough for you to feel complacent and become lazy, but at the same time enough for you to find food and be able to stuff your belly and pay for rent and whatnot, until you can actually find a new job.
That's not my business,
Replied the kind-hearted capitalist.
I've paid your wages and provided you with plenty of work for a long time past. I've no more work for you to do at present. Come round again in a few months' time and I'll see what I can do.
I love the fact that in this case the capitalist, quote unquote, is like the whole industry. Like, really, they can't find any other job anywhere. You know, it's just like, no, everything is shut down, everything is not looking for work, everything is on full stop. What version of reality is this? You know, even in Romania, like, if you can't find jobs, you can literally just go into the European Union or somewhere else. Like, you can go into another country, something that I advocate against. And I'll tell you why I advocate against. Not advocating against people leaving, but against other countries allowing people from outside to come in and look for jobs. This is like really ridiculous at this point. It's just a wet dream. It's just like, it's not a criticism to capitalism, it's just a straw man.
But what about the necessaries of life?
Demanded Harlow.
We must have something to eat.
Of course you must,
Replied the capitalist affably.
and I shall be very pleased to sell you some.
But we ain't got no bloody money.
Well, you can't expect me to give you my goods for nothing. You didn't work for nothing, you know. I paid you for your work and you should have saved something. You should have been thrifty like me. Look how I've got on by being thrifty.
The unemployed looked blankly at each other, but the rest of the crowd only laughed, and then the three unemployed began to abuse the kind-hearted capitalist, demanding that he should give them some of the necessaries of life that he had piled up in his warehouses, or to be allowed to work and produce some more for their own needs, and even threatened to take some of the things by force if he did not comply with their demands. But the kind-hearted capitalist told them not to be insolent and spoke to them about honesty, and said if they were not careful he would have their faces battered in for them by the police, or if necessary he would call out the military and have them shot down like dogs, the same he had done before at Featherstone and Belfast.
Of course, because they're not owning those machines, and them doing that would be violating private property. But here's the thing, right? Socialists don't think that the capitalist owns those machines. Right? If the machine breaks, then yeah, sure, the capitalist should replace them, not the workers. It's just like, it is such an unjust system, right? Now, again, the workers could crowdfund, they could look for jobs elsewhere. But let's look at and analyze how the market works for a bit, because this is one of the reasons the USSR went belly up and why all socialist countries are having financial issues. According to this, the factory was so successful that they produced a lot more goods than they could sell. And this reminds me of what happened to my dad when he decided to pick up agriculture, right? So my dad had this plot of land, and he decided to plant some pumpkins. Now, what's interesting about it is that the harvest was so great that he managed to make more pumpkins than he actually expected. And obviously, initially, he was really happy. He thought he's going to get a good price on them at the market. They were excellent pumpkins, naturally made. And when he went at the market, what he realized is that everyone else's crop managed to be that good. It was a really good year. Everyone managed to make really good pumpkins, and not only that, but they managed to get a lot of them. What happened is the price of the pumpkins went down because as people bought pumpkins, they really didn't need them, right? So the prices went down. My dad really made far less than if it was a bad year, and he didn't even manage to sell all of them. So he brought home a lot of pumpkins, and I remember like for a couple of months I only ate pumpkins, and it was so disgusting. But because if you eat a lot of the same thing, it becomes really bad. But the point is, like, if the factory managed to produce so much, right, the price of the necessary the squares of bread would go down. So if the factory would keep producing them, they would be unable to pay the worker because no one is interested in what the factory is producing. So obviously the factory needs to shut down or like close production up until they manage to sell the stock they have, and then they will resume production. Now the workers, again, they are now qualified workers. They have been working with those machinery. They're experts at what they're doing, so they can ask for higher wages. When they go to a different competitor of that factory and say, yeah, I want to work, be like, what do you know? What exactly do you know to do? And it's like, well, I'm an expert in this machine and this machine and this machine. So I demand a bigger wage than a complete novice that you're bringing. And the competitor now has to think, okay, I can either hire this guy that's qualified and already knows how to operate this delicate machinery, or I can hire a new guy and invest money in order to have his training, and only after maybe like a year he will be just as competent as the new worker. So like none of this is being taken into account. All the criticism to capitalism are not up to today's standards. Which is why it pains me that I need to talk about this. And I'll upload a video about the cartoon that explains how capitalism works exactly. So I'll see you all then.